Prince William's scathing accusation, "You sold us out," was aimed directly at Meghan Markle as she was escorted from royal grounds, suspected of betraying the crown via a covert Netflix agreement. This dramatic standoff stunned everyone. William had apparently secured irrefutable proof connecting Meghan to a clandestine deal, granting Netflix exclusive behind-the-scenes footage of the palace in return for millions. What was once a private sanctuary for the royal family was now seemingly turned into an opportunity for a glossy reality series. William, feeling deeply betrayed, has openly voiced his anger, sending ripples through Buckingham Palace while King Charles grapples with the issue of fractured trust. Meghan's future within the royal ranks appears grim. In this video, we delve into William's discovery, how it shredded royal protocol, and why it might spell the end of the Sussex legacy. Stay tuned, because the truth is nothing short of explosive. But first, please like, subscribe, and tap on notifications for real-time updates. What happens when trust isn't just breached, but obliterated on a global stage? When loyalty, secrecy, and the dignity of one of the world's oldest institutions collide with Hollywood's thirst for continuous storytelling. That collision became unavoidable inside Buckingham Palace, resulting in consequences beyond anything seen before. The kingdom's inner world has always stood apart. Gilded halls, hush-hush strategy sessions behind thick curtains, personal notes exchanged among monarchs, shielded by centuries of tradition and reticence. But when Prince William burst into a private office brandishing a dossier and a grave charge, the monarchy's very bedrock quaked. "You sold us out," he reportedly said, his voice frosty and resolute. In that moment, the lines separating relative from adversary crystallized. Meghan had ventured beyond permissible bounds. No longer was it just a squabble among in-laws. It was a betrayal captured on camera, enshrined in contracts, and accompanied by large payments. Within moments, whispers escalated to immediate reaction. Palace aides scrambled, security repositioned, and Meghan, who had been mid-conversation with her private assistant, remained unaware of the tsunami about to break. The royal family had decided there would be no more cautious warnings. This time, she would be physically escorted from the premises. But how did events unfold to this point? How did the once-hailed Duchess of Sussex, long seen as a revitalizing force in the House of Windsor, become its symbol of betrayal? The story traces back to a rumored $100 million Netflix arrangement, a contract that commanded headlines and roused alarm among those who believe the monarchy is beyond commercial valuation. From that instant, subtle changes could be seen. How gatherings were filmed, who was present at family get-togethers, and where casual dialogues occurred. Palace insiders detected a gradual drip of intimate but curated details. The wider public noticed too, particularly through the Netflix docuseries Harry and Meghan, revealing personal palace moments. The audience was captivated. The commentary dissected every second, and Harry and Meghan smiled. But the royals had a different perspective. Senior palace staff, those well-practiced in crisis management, began compiling evidence, timestamp clips from restricted corridors, audio of staff conversations, plus unauthorized footage from private family activities. Then came the turning point. Prince William, normally composed and tactful, received the compilation. After a sleepless night scrutinizing it, he requested a direct meeting with King Charles. Urgent conferences followed. This was more than embarrassing. It was a fundamental breach of both tradition and familial trust. Meghan wasn't merely telling her personal story. She had reportedly exploited palace access to profit from behind-the-scenes coverage. For the future king, this overstepped every boundary. That sets the stage for the full story. We'll examine how William uncovered the truth, the critical moment Meghan crossed the line, and the final face-off that ended her chapter as a royal. The Netflix contract opened a Pandora's box of legal concerns. King Charles's role, Princess Anne's continued silence, and Harry's personal predicament. Ultimately, we'll witness how William, ordinarily reserved, rose to say, "Enough." But first, let's backtrack to the early warning signs most observers overlooked. Upon Meghan's initial entry to the royal fold, Many people imagined a fresh start, an American, biracial, outspoken figure offering new life to the monarchy. She was no stranger to media attention and carried herself with poise. Yet from the outset, palace sources now admit there was unease, not because of her background, but in the manner she orchestrated her public image. She was deliberate, savvy, less confined by protocol, and more eager to dictate her own narrative. Early hints involve her insistence on capturing various parts of her royal experience. Initially described as personal mementos, it soon mushroomed into something bigger. She began inviting photographers to casual events, recording audio during staff meetings, and bringing in a videographer under the guise of documentation. Initially subtle and somewhat overlooked, it eventually escalated. Then came a Netflix deal. When the Sussexes announced their multi-million-dollar partnership with the streaming giant, palace staff responded with shock, not only at the contract's sheer size, but at its greater ramifications. Tradition prohibits the monetization of royal status. Sure, there have been books and interviews before, but this was different. A polished, high-profile production with trailers, teasers, editorial involvement, and, crucially, Meghan and Harry retaining creative control. The official Buckingham Palace statement was mild, offering standard well wishes. Behind closed doors, though, the reaction was explosive. Confidential strategy sessions ensued, legal counsel was consulted, and MI5 was rumored to have been asked to evaluate security breaches. Meanwhile, Meghan was seen gracing red carpet events, sharing warm smiles with Serena Williams, and rubbing shoulders with Netflix executives throughout Los Angeles. The distance between the couple and the palace grew wider with each passing day, and with it, the watchful eyes of those behind the gates. In response, palace officials initiated Operation Preservation, a discreet yet comprehensive strategy to pinpoint leaks, keep tabs on media appearances, and protect the confidentiality of royal communications. In the weeks that followed, even palace veterans were astonished by the findings. Confidential text exchanges surfaced nearly verbatim in Netflix scripts, while covert footage emerged from areas that only permitted authorized personnel during Meghan's final months in the UK. There were also audio recordings of personal family discussions suggesting clandestine microphones or unauthorized taps. A compilation of this material eventually landed on Prince William's desk, accompanied by a single directive: "You'll want to see this yourself." What unfolded afterward permanently reconfigured the delicate balance of influence within the royal family. William, typically the embodiment of restraint and silence in defense of the monarchy, took an uncharacteristically decisive step. The subsequent gathering was never broadcast to the public, and the few details that trickled out originated from insiders and seasoned reporters. According to their accounts, William paced anxiously across the room, holding a trembling folder. King Charles listened in shock, visibly unsettled by the gravity of the revelations. "I trusted her," William declared, voice charged with betrayal. "We all did. She broke that trust." The tense hush that followed signaled a point of no return. Within these pages, the events leading up to Meghan's final exit from her royal role will be examined in detail. The moment of confrontation, the calls left unanswered, the warnings issued by legal teams, and the staff members who risked their positions to ensure that history would not be misconstrued. But first, consider this. What would you do if someone used your home, family, and private life to build their public empire without permission? For the royal family, the response was immediate and resolute. The door was shut with finality. This was no polite farewell. It was a definitive excommunication. And as Meghan Markle walked away from the palace walls for the last time, it may have dawned on her with alarming clarity that certain boundaries must never be crossed, not for fame, and not even for Netflix. In the hushed corridors of Buckingham Palace, where a discreet whisper can outweigh a raised voice, there was a single name provoking more trepidation in 2020 than any individual relative or chatty insider: Netflix. This streaming colossus, which had already left its mark on the royal brand through controversial portrayals, was now in partnership with two of the monarchy's most recognized figures, Harry and Meghan. From a distance, it might have appeared like a fairy tale couple stepping away from tradition to share their story on a global platform, a break with precedent that some observers deemed fresh and empowering. Yet behind the palace walls, the sentiment could not have been more different. This institution is unlike a typical corporation or an everyday brand, although it often operates with the precision of one. The monarchy represents centuries of lineage, diplomatic engagement, and national identity. In every official smile, every formal introduction, and every carefully framed photograph is choreographed to reinforce continuity and maintain an aura of mystique. Harry and Meghan's $100 million agreement with Netflix did more than challenge that narrative. It blew it wide open. In the immediate aftermath of their official departure, dubbed Megxit by a ravenous media, Harry and Meghan had moved across the Atlantic, citing unrelenting tabloid scrutiny, the stress placed on mental health, and a wish to raise their children outside the pressure cooker of royal life. The Queen offered a measured response of support, firm yet understanding. Then, like lightning, came the bombshell reports. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had secured an extraordinary deal with Netflix. The announcement sent shock waves through an already tense royal landscape. Not only had they secured a deal from their public persona, but they had aligned themselves with a company well known for gritty or less than flattering portrayals of the royal family, most famously in the series The Crown. To those working within the palace, the irony was almost too bitter to swallow. A platform that profited from dramatizing the Queen's story now held exclusive contracts with two of her own kin. Many staff members felt blindsided, some advising patients to see what content would truly emerge. But unrest began to simmer behind closed doors. Questions ricocheted through the corridors. What privileges had they extended to Netflix? Were cameras allowed behind the palace's heavily guarded doors? Would sensitive information slip out under the guise of entertainment? Might private interactions, once presumed off-limits, be aired worldwide for profit? Shortly thereafter, signs that something bigger was unfolding began to surface. Film crews appeared alongside the couple during charitable activities, casual walks on the beach, and even visits to school campuses. Sources hinted that Meghan and Harry might have granted filmmakers the green light to capture moments beyond public engagements. One former staffer even reported that Meghan requested constant filming, even during a deeply personal phone call with an ex-palace colleague, insisting history deserves an honest telling. In time, the extent of the Netflix venture became apparent. This was not a standard documentary, but a carefully orchestrated perspective. General audiences eventually witnessed heartfelt confessions, never before seen home videos, and emotional revelations. Palace insiders, however, were fixated on footage never intended for public eyes. Familiar rooms in Kensington Palace used for confidential meetings, corridors that resembled restricted areas, and casual glimpses of William and Kate at intimate family gatherings, utterly unaware they were being recorded. None of it appeared spontaneous. Every camera angle, every whisper captured, and every reveal was finely tuned, assembled piece by piece to escalate suspense with each new episode. On the British side of the Atlantic, the media erupted into heated debate, with some praising the EIBU series as Meghan's honest counterpoint to years of slanted headlines, while others questioned whether airing private royal matters was ever justified. Supporters saw her as exposing painful truths she had long kept hidden, yet royal insiders viewed it as a deeply unsettling breach of sacred confidences. From the palace's perspective, this wasn't just a fresh wave of invasive press. Their real alarm centered on the extent of control Meghan and Harry wielded over what made it into the final cut. Unlike customary royal engagements, the palace held no rights of review, no authority to amend or veto details, and no guarantee that personal moments wouldn't be transformed into content for public entertainment. The royal family has long been compelled by constitutional necessity to guard its every word and gesture. To many, those efforts now seemed on the verge of disintegration, undone by a single production deal. At the center of it all was Meghan. Within the palace walls, her image had transformed from misunderstood outsider to the primary creative force behind a new, and in some eyes, unapproved, Royal Chronicle. Critics claimed her true aim was not catharsis but calculation. Timelines, agreements, and outtakes from as early as 2019 surfaced in the Netflix installments, suggesting that filming had commenced long before the official break with royal duties. Her defenders argued that, after being silenced for so long, she was finally reclaiming her voice on the global stage. Palace insiders, however, pointed to details that went well beyond simply telling her story. The bigger question emerged when microphones were spied at events that were never supposed to be documented in any capacity, and leaked contract provisions hinted at behind-the-scenes footage from pivotal moments in royal life. No one could say for certain which gatherings were recorded or who had knowingly consented. Yet when Prince William discovered how far the filming might have gone, he demanded an exhaustive review of every public and private appearance the Sussexes participated in during their final year as working royals. Investigators returned with more than William had bargained for: concealed mics stitched into clothing, cameras mounted to capture angles inside official vehicles, and audio recordings of unguarded conversations once thought safe from outside ears. As Queen Elizabeth's final years gave way to King Charles's new reign, the monarchy was already delicately navigating a moment of profound change. The prospect of a globally broadcast docu-series that might reveal more than harmless family chatter was truly unsettling. Beneath all the pageantry lies the machinery of diplomacy, global relations, and even strategic discussions. The concern was simple: what details or secrets, however unwittingly, might have been caught on film? Tension ratcheted further when MI5 became involved following the release of Episode 4. The scene in question was a fleeting shot of a diplomatic envelope traded in what appeared to be a casual garden walk. To the untrained eye, it was a trivial snippet, but security professionals wondered if critical information had inadvertently been shown to the world. Might this production have dipped into unintentional espionage? Although hard evidence was scarce, the situation alone was enough to spur a turn in public sentiment. Support initially flowed toward the Sussexes for defying an age-old institution. Yet as each new episode aired, headlines began shifting from empathy to alarm. Commentators bluntly criticized weaponized privacy, and one British columnist wondered aloud how Meghan could claim she was fleeing the limelight while narrating her own documentary series. Within the palace and royal residences like Windsor and Balmoral, responses ran the gamut from polite refusals to comment to private expressions of dismay. The Princess of Wales, true to form, gave no public statement. Prince Edward was said to have voiced regret among close friends. Camilla, known for her pragmatic nature, apparently seethed over a fleeting scene that she felt was a thinly veiled reference to her. But no one felt the ripples more intensely than William, whose children were alluded to and whose wife was depicted in an unflattering light. Even the late Princess Diana's legacy was showcased, at times as a means of justification, at times as a pointed barb. Then came the moment that crossed every threshold of decency. A brief segment showing William and Harry speaking after Prince Philip's funeral. Though the audio was mercifully absent and the subtitles vague, it was apparent the brothers were being watched and recorded. During a private viewing set up to assess the damage, William reportedly stood, turned to an advisor, and said, "They filmed us at a funeral for a show." With those words, his hurt transitioned from the level of courtly decorum to something profoundly personal. Meghan refused to address the backlash. Perhaps, from her perspective, this was exactly the moment she intended to lay bare. All the while, palace operations pivoted toward containment. This wasn't only about preserving a carefully cultivated image. It was about salvaging a sense of safety. In a sphere where allegiance is paramount and those who betray it find themselves swiftly exiled, Meghan's Netflix partnership had gone beyond the pale. There could be no apologizing away a breach of this magnitude. And the one royal poised to enforce that boundary was the very person who had maintained the firmest silence: Prince William. Inside the austere, meticulously maintained chambers of Kensington Palace, William sat alone, sifting through a worn leather folder among the diplomatic gifts and faded portraits. This room usually served as his private sanctuary for matters not meant to see the press. Condolence letters, personal notes, secret briefings. On that evening, a single flash drive lay before him, labeled with no visible markings. What it contained would shift the ground beneath the monarchy. By the time William pressed play on what insiders referred to as the Red Files, the Netflix series was already in its third week, continuously feeding global fascination. Public chatter whiplashed between admiration for the Sussexes' candor and worry over potential lines being crossed. The question reverberating through social media and newsrooms alike was whether Meghan was finally speaking her truth or whether her newfound power was swallowing a centuries-old institution in the process. William paid no heed to what the tabloids were saying or where public opinion swayed. He had stumbled upon something that went far beyond sensational headlines. It began as a faint ripple in early December, when a junior member of the royal household's communications team approached William's private secretary, visibly uneasy. This staffer had unearthed footage used in the Netflix series, footage that had never been cataloged for any public record. Just 11 seconds in length, the clip featured William stepping out of a black Range Rover, briefly saluting a guard. At first glance, it seemed innocent. The alarming detail was the perspective. The camera was inside the car, capturing a private moment where no outside media had been authorized. The inference was undeniable. Someone who belonged to William's own security circle had taken the video. A few seasoned aides tried to downplay it as a careless mistake. Perhaps someone's phone had kept recording. Yet when two more segments turned up, one revealing a royal dining room during a family gathering, another capturing Princess Charlotte at a private school function, skepticism vanished. This was no coincidence. Behind the stately facade of Kensington Palace, William's trusted staff quietly collated every irregular snippet. He had been raised under Queen Elizabeth's unwavering principle of reserved composure and intentional discretion, so he was no stranger to subtleties. Over time, he had already noticed that events involving Meghan and Harry seemed to attract intrusive camera work, inexplicable inquiries from reporters, and tabloid stories conspicuously detailed for gatherings never attended by journalists. Growing signs pointed to a covert plan, and William began to suspect that Meghan had orchestrated a systematic effort to gather private information. Striving for secrecy, his team started cross-checking each shot from the docuseries against palace security logs, staff schedules, and closed-circuit footage. They discovered that numerous scenes were recorded without the awareness of attendees, which explained why so many private moments found their way into the public domain. Some lines in the voiceovers matched unguarded conversations that had never gone beyond the palace walls. One particular clip included a distant but discernible echo of a confidential Sandringham discussion among William, Charles, and Queen Elizabeth, a tense meeting held in the aftermath of Megxit. That discovery confirmed this wasn't a random assortment of home videos. It was a methodical project. Over 3 nights, William watched the unedited material his aides had compiled. He was silent, occasionally pausing the recordings, rewatching incriminating segments, and jotting notes. He neither raised his voice nor shed tears, but those present later recounted that when the final frame froze, an aerial shot of his children, filmed from above as they meandered through the gardens, he remained motionless for over 20 minutes, gazing at what should have been a private family memory. This was no mere breach of decorum. To William, it was personal. His wife, his children, and the Queen's legacy had effectively been turned into Netflix material. There was no shouting match or dramatic showdown. Instead, William brought in 2 of his most devoted aides and gave them clear-cut instructions. Investigate every potential leak, trace each request made by Meghan's team during her royal tenure, and chart every instance of unauthorized recording. The directive triggered a painstaking sweep through palace archives, digital logs, and staff interviews. Even MI5 cyber specialists were consulted discreetly. Questions circulated about whether Meghan habitually recorded candid conversations or orchestrated reflection sessions after formal events. In hindsight, those reflection sessions seemed to generate the very lines that appeared in voiceovers. Former staff recalled one instance where Meghan invited a stylist into her suite to discuss the symbolic resonance of wearing a particular shade of blue, specifically tied to feminine deference and monarchy. Word for word, that dialogue ended up in the third episode of the documentary. At that realization, William's resentment evolved into something colder. It was no accident. Meghan had been constructing her narrative of royal life well before she officially stepped away. For William, who had seen his late mother repeatedly exploited by the media, this felt like history repeating itself. Diana had been ensnared by interview tactics, manipulated, and sold as a spectacle for profit. Decades later, someone he had once welcomed was now offering private moments of his family for global consumption. His reaction was not heated or impulsive. It was measured and resolute. William was meticulously gathering facts, waiting for the ideal moment to respond. He was choosing the right time, place, and method to respond. And that moment was approaching. His team's investigation confirmed the worst. Meghan's deal with Netflix bestowed her far-reaching production rights, loosely phrased, but expansive enough to include any images, incidents, or emotional recollections from her period within the royal family. Practically everything fell under her purview. Moments caught on film, bits of dialogue, even shared memories, without a shred of veto power from the palace. What made it worse were insider whispers that Meghan insisted on emphasizing the cold indifference of the royals, determined to illustrate how constrictive traditions could smother a modern woman's voice. Confidants said she wasn't merely filming a documentary. She was, in her mind, reinterpreting centuries of royal history. For William, this was the final straw. He compiled the full investigative findings and brought them to King Charles. Ever wary of media storms, Charles hesitated at first. Then he sifted through the evidence, security concerns, covert recordings, staff accounts, and transcripts of private conversations, and reached his limit. "It's not just family anymore," William reportedly said. "It's the crown itself." Charles and William, not always the closest duo, found themselves in agreement. Meghan would be held accountable, and this time, no gracious communique or polite statement would smooth it over. She had crossed a line by monetizing their private moments. A plan emerged for a meeting at Clarence House. Harry would be notified only at the last minute, giving him no chance to alert Meghan or shield her for what was coming. She would be summoned under the pretext of discussing imminent royal projects, but instead, she would walk into a reckoning. Quietly, William composed a handwritten note addressed to Harry, sealed with his personal cipher. Though its exact wording remained confidential, rumors circulated that it contained passages like, "I stood by you when others mistrusted your choice. I fought for your place. Now you've turned my family's life into a public display. I can't remain silent anymore." It was William's final appeal, not just as an older brother, but as someone witnessing the heritage he swore to guard being systematically exposed for commercial gain. With that, the palace surveillance effort drew to a close. William had the truth he needed, and he was ready to confront Meghan face to face. But just as tensions reached their peak, an unexpected source flung open a door that would cement every suspicion. A senior Netflix figure, known for staying tight-lipped during the docuseries launch, shared wine and conversation at a private gathering in Geneva. In a room of European dignitaries, philanthropists, and discreet media insiders, the executive bragged, after a few too many glasses, about Netflix's exclusive window into the monarchy. When pressed about the Sussexes, he let slip a comment that reached Clarence House within days. "We weren't just filming their story. We got inside info, archival details, and raw footage never intended for viewers. Meghan planned this long before we began shooting." Unbeknownst to the Netflix executive, a British media consultant at the same dinner quietly recorded his boast. Within an hour, Prince William was informed. The next day, the recordings arrived by diplomatic courier. William didn't listen alone. King Charles, 2 legal advisors, and the head of royal communications joined him. The room was silent as the audio played. When a phrase, "footage not meant for the public," was repeated, Charles leaned forward and whispered, "That's it. That's the proof." Still, for legal reasons, they needed more than audio. Documents were essential. Then the smoking gun appeared. 3 days after the Geneva dinner, an anonymous package was delivered to a royal legal consultant. Inside was a partially redacted but authentic-looking licensing agreement. It was a production contract between Archwell Productions and an unnamed third-party editor, dated nearly 6 months before Meghan and Harry officially stepped back from royal duties. The contract that drew William's I carried the heading, a child access and media permissions, which already raised alarm. A crucial clause, highlighted in vivid red, granted the producer unrestricted authority to include personal recordings amassed during 2019 to 2020 from inside royal residences, vehicles, and official engagements for an editorial depiction of royal life. Alongside this formal text lay a handwritten note reading, "They knew exactly what they were doing. This was premeditated. Protect this document." William, scanning the clause again and again, felt the page crumple in his tight grasp. For months, he had tried to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, believing perhaps Meghan had been swept up in an unwieldy media machine, and Harry, grieving and fiercely loyal, simply hadn't realized the ramifications. Yet here was evidence of an intentional plan. Meghan had begun archiving and cataloging private moments long before her departure from royal duties, fully intending to convert them into a lucrative narrative. In William's eyes, it went beyond betrayal. This was deliberate opportunism that struck at the heart of the monarchy. The palace's legal teams swiftly moved into overdrive, sifting through every engagement and event the Sussexes had attended in their final year as senior royals. Lawyers also reached out to the BBC, ITV, and Sky News, urging them to block any leaked clips that might surface. International outlets were warned via cease and desist letters not to publicize unreleased Netflix material involving private family affairs. Even Netflix itself received a guarded notice that the Crown would consider global legal action if its privacy was willfully violated. While these diplomatic and legal maneuvers gathered momentum, William refused to settle for muted statements or carefully worded press releases. He wanted Meghan to face him directly. No buffer, no time to spin the narrative, and he intended to speak plainly. But first, his senior communications director tracked down a pivotal witness, Alicia Manning, who had served as an assistant editor at Tong Archwell. Alicia had quit the project in late 2021 and vanished from the public eye, only to re-emerge under strict anonymity for a private conversation. However, in early 2023, under strict anonymity, she agreed to a private conversation with William's senior communications director. During that meeting, Alicia confirmed everything. Meghan had maintained a secret vault of recordings, phone calls, private voice memos, and even casual palace walkthroughs. Her goal was clear. She wanted to control the narrative before tabloids distorted it. But Alicia revealed something more unsettling. Meghan didn't just want to share her side of the story. She aimed to redefine the monarchy itself. She believed the institution was outdated and that her experiences would expose its flaws. Alicia also divulged how Meghan had logged every clip with detailed timestamps, including a shot of William strolling through Kensington Gardens alone, apparently slated for a future episode meant to highlight his supposed solitude. Realizing he was more than just a casualty in Meghan's unfolding script, William concluded that her exclusion from royal life must be total, not a polite half measure. The day was chosen, a Thursday, and Meghan received an invitation to Clarence House, believing she would be discussing a possible mental health initiative. She arrived in a tailored charcoal coat, phone in hand, trailed by her assistant, completely unaware she was walking into a confrontation that would irrevocably alter her relationship with the royal family. She was ushered into a small chamber where William, Charles, and 2 aides waited in silence, Harry notably absent. Meghan caught the chilly air instantly. No pleasantries were exchanged. William spoke with measured clarity. "We know," he said. Meghan held his gaze. "Know what?" His reply was unwavering. "About the cameras, microphones, footage, contracts, all of it you kept from us. We've pieced everything together." Meghan slowly lowered herself into a seat. "I told my story. That's not illegal," she said. William's tone grew more pointed. though he remained calm. You used us to fuel your narrative. You spied on our lives and spun it into content. You're done here. An aide present recalled a charged pause before Meghan responded. I was protecting myself. You were monetizing our private moments, William countered. Over 20 minutes, the room was steeped in a stony silence, occasionally punctuated by Meghan's terse rebuttals and Charles's clipped acknowledgments. There were no raised voices, no dramatics, simply a grim legal accounting of facts. Meghan had drawn on intimate royal knowledge during her tenure to fashion a commercial product. In the end, the verdict was final. She was no longer welcome. No joint initiatives, no cordial holiday gatherings, no ongoing support. Even her title faced scrutiny. As the meeting ended, the king's private secretary handed her a formal letter, notifying her that unless she ceased exploiting royal material in future endeavors, her ties to the family would be severed for good. At the door, Meghan is said to have turned back and said, "You're making a grave mistake. People know who you really are now." Inside Clarence's house, William glanced at his father. "We're not concerned with how we appear," he said quietly. "We're concerned with the truth." This revelation was the smoking gun, turning whispers into war and sealing Meghan's exile. The royal family had drawn a line in the sand. The game had changed, and there was no turning back. Before the confrontation, and before William said, "You're out," Meghan was already maneuvering behind scenes. To the public, she remained polished and poised, smiling on red carpets and giving thoughtful interviews. While Meghan appeared in interviews and launched lifestyle projects, behind closed doors, in boardrooms, private Zoom meetings, and discreet gatherings at upscale Los Angeles restaurants, she was orchestrating something much bigger. Far from simply coping outside the palace gates, Meghan was actively reframing the royal family's image in her own mold. Most onlookers zeroed in on the Netflix partnership as the core of the controversy, but that was only a fraction of her larger design, one that took root long before she and Harry stepped down from their roles. To understand the extent, one must revisit Meghan's final year as an active royal. In contrast to traditional aides loyal to court protocol, Meghan sought counsel from Hollywood PR specialists, seasoned script consultants, and even a documentarian versed in palace intrigue. These weren't just advisors. They were architects of her emerging brand. Collectively dubbed the Inner Circle, they kept themselves on the periphery of official events, seldom mingling with staff. Yet behind the curtain, they steered press releases, shaped editing decisions, and often sent email instructions from cryptic private domains. Palace employees began asking why photographers appeared in off-limits areas and why they were expected to sign NDAs that bypassed standard palace channels. In reality, Meghan was laying the foundation for Archewell, a charity meets media enterprise meant to amplify her narrative, culminating in the Netflix venture. Early on, it existed only as scribbled bullet points jotted down in impromptu Frogmore Cottage brainstorming sessions or whispered about in local cafes. But even as the palace publicly preached a smooth transition, Meghan kept in touch with Hollywood producers and brand strategists, often connecting via a Beverly Hills lawyer. Through old contacts tied to her days on Suits, she found a receptive ear at Netflix. Negotiations required careful orchestration. Leaks placed Meghan in the media spotlight as a misunderstood, modern woman clashing with archaic traditions. Such narratives built public sympathy and set the stage for her truth. When Netflix expressed interest, Meghan demanded final editing authority and total ownership of the story's direction. According to one Archewell staffer, Meghan told a high-ranking executive, "I'm not just giving you my life, I'm shaping how it's portrayed." Inside the palace, the family was unaware of how far things had progressed. Meghan maintained the appearance of cooperation, attending meetings with royal aides, nodding along, and fulfilling official duties. But at night, she was on calls with streaming agents, editors, and narrative designers. One bold move came just 2 months before her official royal exit. Meghan quietly traveled to New York without her usual security and met with a digital media agency team at a boutique hotel side entrance. The meeting's details remained secret for months until a staffer leaked information during a deposition related to a separate media lawsuit. It was a pitch session where Meghan presented a mock reel featuring footage of her walking Windsor grounds, an emotional monologue about her Duchess role, and staged clips from her home office reflecting on royal pressures. The material was raw yet meticulously designed to convey everything Meghan believed the palace had long muzzled her from saying. Perhaps the biggest enticement in her Netflix pitch was the insider access clause, a bold promise that viewers would witness the monarchy in ways never permitted before. Armed with behind-the-scenes recordings and carefully curated footage, she secured the deal on grounds that some aspects of royal life should no longer stay hidden in the shadows. Her orchestrations didn't end when filming wrapped. Ahead of the series' release, Meghan collaborated with top-tier PR agencies to brace for inevitable backlash and counter any moves by the palace. She prepared to spin any disapproval as proof of institutionalized hostility against her. A publicist who briefly joined her launch team recalled Meghan's decisive approach. "If half the world hates me and the other half loves me, so be it, as long as they're watching." Meanwhile, Harry, though visibly participating in taped interviews and sharing personal anecdotes, seemed unaware of the extent of Meghan's operations. Some staffers claimed he was kept out of the earliest negotiations. Others recalled him expressing doubt about certain scenes, particularly one involving William, that he found too personal, only to learn Meghan had already signed off on it. As Archewell's reach widened, so did Meghan's network. She established ties with U.S. legislators, Hollywood icons, seasoned journalists, and philanthropic figures, ensuring her presence at glitzy functions was more about staying in the spotlight than mere socializing. She understood that to be effective, her voice needed constant amplification in influential circles. Yet Meghan remained cautious about the unpredictability of the royal family. She allegedly maintained contact with a discreet senior aide sympathetic to her position, someone with a line of sight into the palace's inner workings, who would privately alert her to any warning signs of legal recourse or shifting family sentiment. This gave Meghan confidence that she could defend her project under the banners of creative expression and personal documentation rights. After all, she believed she was merely telling her truth. "They can't lay a finger on me without looking like the aggressors," she reportedly told her lawyers. What Meghan never calculated was William's threshold for betrayal. While Meghan's strategy sought public sympathy and global influence, William had decided enough was enough. He wasn't planning a showy rebuttal or media counterstrike. He intended to sever ties outright. Days before the fateful Clarence House confrontation, Meghan attempted one last maneuver. Through intermediaries, she offered to meet William confidentially and even hinted she might postpone another documentary if the palace agreed to release a neutral statement on her Netflix series. William gave no response. He simply waited, determined to address the matter face to face, still holding on to a faint hope that it wasn't too late to salvage whatever trust remained. Fan 9 Meghan had played her cards skillfully, leveraging media, shaping a narrative, and redefining what it means to be royal today. But she never fully grasped that, despite its flaws, the royal family deeply understood betrayal. William, raised with a strong sense of duty and loss, would never allow his family story to be turned into a Hollywood script. While Meghan leveraged her private channels and shaped her version of events, the palace fell silent, a silence that often signals, in royal circles, far more than politeness or caution. And behind that quiet stood the frail but resolute figure of Queen Elizabeth II, whose official duties were waning even as her instincts remained razor-sharp. Over her unprecedented reign, the Queen had seen scandals, cultural upheavals, military conflicts, and profound personal loss. She possessed an uncanny ability to recognize who could be trusted and when her beloved institution was in jeopardy. Unknown to most, in the twilight of her life, the Queen penned a handwritten letter to Charles and William. It would remain hidden until Meghan's alleged transgressions came to light. Transgressions the Queen had begun to suspect well before her passing. By the summer of 2022, she was delegating more duties to Charles and William, all the while quietly fixated on one pressing concern: the widening rift with the Sussexes. Behind closed doors, she questioned why Meghan seemed so intent on archiving and revealing her royal experiences. Why were private family scenes appearing in unfamiliar corners of the media? And, more unsettling still, why did it feel as though the monarchy was being dissected frame by frame? This was not about petty jealousy or clinging to old customs. The Queen understood that the monarchy's mystique, carefully upheld through centuries, was being commercialized and parceled out to the highest bidder. She guessed it was deliberate. In August 2022, at Balmoral, she asked William to join her for tea. Already tired, she spoke with unusual directness. Have you noticed how deliberately she remains silent? William hesitated, puzzled. She continued, silence is powerful only when it's chosen for a reason. William later admitted to a confidant that her words lingered like a prophecy. It was at that moment he understood his grandmother's profound concern. Meghan's seeming restraint was no surrender. It was a tactic. Acting on her misgivings, the Queen discreetly instructed palace archivists to gather every relevant document tied to Meghan's departure. In the midst of reviewing these records, emails, transcripts, and meeting notes from the fraught Sandringham summit, disturbing inconsistencies emerged. The family's central agreement had been crystal clear. No private, unreleased palace images or information would ever be commercialized. But Netflix teasers showing Frogmore Cottage interiors, Windsor's private rooms, and other personal glimpses of royal life suggested that promise had been breached. With her health waning, the Queen summoned the Lord Chamberlain. She pored over every piece of evidence. When she finished, she uttered a single, telling comment. She's far cleverer than we imagined. Soon after, the Queen crafted a handwritten missive. Wax-sealed and labeled for Charles and William's eyes alone, it served as a directive to be invoked only if the monarchy's privacy was violated beyond repair. Following her death, the letter remained locked away at Clarence House. Charles read it first, then William, and neither spoke of it publicly. Yet the tone of the royal response toward Meghan shifted markedly from that point on. Its text was straightforward yet charged with authority, addressing Charles and William as not just heirs, but stewards of the crown's legacy. She urged them to be measured in their reactions, but uncompromising in defending the institution if someone, no matter their title, exploited royal access for personal gain. The letter's most resonant line eventually emerged through royal biographers. The story of our family is not for sale. Should it become clear that our trust was traded for cameras, I rely on you both to shut the gates. Though not a formal command, it was a final blessing, letting them act without hesitation. In the early days, William had tried to believe reconciliation was possible. But when allegations of private footage being reused for Netflix gained traction, the Queen's warning took on a stark new significance. She had foreseen this scenario, even while the world pictured her only as the unflappable sovereign making her last bow. So when William stood before Meghan and demanded answers over her secret recordings and alleged commercial aspirations, he was not just a grandson defending his wounded family. He was the executor of the Queen's last directive, delivering justice on her behalf. She had, in her final days at ND in her own handwriting, told him precisely what to do if this moment arrived. The Queen's words became the emotional linchpin of the royal family's stance, shifting the debate away from mere optics or simmering family tensions. At its core, it was a question of centuries-old tradition being commodified for personal gain, priceless heirlooms of memory turned into a marketable show. When William allowed his inner circle to read his grandmother's letter, some were moved to tears. One aide called it eerie, while another remarked, she foresaw our downfall as though it were already in motion. Her clarity of purpose was deeply unsettling. From that moment onward, the palace could no longer maintain a neutral front. Silence was no longer an option. It was as though the Queen spoke once more from beyond, leaving no ambiguity in her directive. Meghan had presumably counted on the monarchy losing some of its resolve after Queen Elizabeth II's passing, expecting Charles and William to remain subdued or hesitant in their approach. However, she misjudged the potency of the monarch's final counsel. The Queen's caution was pointed rather than poetic. When Meghan left Clarence's house that day, unaware that a single handwritten message had effectively sealed her fate, she confirmed the Queen's prophecy. She had exchanged the privilege of belonging to the monarchy for a narrative she could package and sell. The royal family's answer rang out with resolute calm, as if guided by the steady hand of a queen who, even in death, refused to let her legacy be trifled with. Gates that had once cracked open for Meghan Markle, warmly at first, were now firmly shut. But an even more wrenching dilemma weighed on Clarence House and Kensington Palace. What of Prince Harry? Was he an unwitting casualty, blind to the depth of Meghan's betrayal, or a key orchestrator behind the scenes? Within the palace, disentangling Harry, the individual, from the wider drama had grown nearly impossible. He had stood shoulder to shoulder with Meghan, publicly and through every controversy, forging a united front. Yet signals emerged that he might be wrestling with contradictory loyalties. He was drawn to Meghan's desire to speak their truth, but quietly worried about the collateral damage. Harry's role in the Netflix saga, and the question of whether he was an accomplice or simply naive, can be traced back to his frustrations long before Megxit. Those closest to him knew that his distrust of the British press ran deep, rooted in the tragic loss of his mother, Princess Diana. He had seen how relentless media scrutiny could destroy a life, and he was determined to protect Meghan from the same fate. Yet his conviction that the palace had failed his mother also fueled a deep-seated skepticism toward the institution he was born into. By the time Meghan entered his world, Harry had already begun to doubt whether the royal family could shield him or his future wife. She, in turn, shared his distrust and questioned traditions. They became a team, united in their sense that the monarchy needed reform. However, evidence suggests Harry was not the central mastermind behind the Netflix deal. A number of Archewell insiders recalled him being present at production meetings, but seldom diving into specifics. He was more vocal about topics like mental health and causes he cared about, while Meghan steered the show's overarching narrative. In one instance, a palace staff document even noted, Harry contributes big-picture ideas. Meghan focuses on story details. Where Harry did voice concern, his comments apparently went unheeded. The private conversation he shared with William after Prince Philip's funeral, which surfaced in the documentary, alarmed him. He reportedly demanded its removal, calling it a sacred family moment. Despite his protest, the footage remained. This raised a troublesome possibility. Had Harry relinquished creative control or willingly handed it over to Meghan, trusting her with decisions he found too painful to scrutinize himself? Occasionally, cracks showed. A source claimed Harry and Meghan argued over an especially personal Christmas memory in Sandringham that Harry wanted cut. She insisted it was essential to the narrative. Ultimately, she won out, and the scene stayed. Inside the palace, opinions of Harry were starkly divided. Some continued to see him as a traumatized son trying to shield his wife from the jaws of the media, while others believed he had transformed into a willing collaborator in dismantling royal tradition. An exasperated aide observed, "You can't keep pleading ignorance while your name is on the dotted line." William's largest grievance wasn't just that private footage had been broadcast to the world. It was that his younger brother, once so protective of the family, now seemed to be airing its every vulnerability. Harry recounted tales of alienation and pain in interviews, effectively casting the palace in a hostile light. While some sympathized, the timing and tone came across as accusatory to those within royal circles. Signs of Harry's inner conflict emerged in the aftermath. He apparently contacted an old household staff member to ask, "Did I go too far?" Receiving no reply, he tried to re-establish a line with his father. Charles expressed his heartbreak, telling him, "You're still my son, but you're tearing this family apart." Harry thanked him, then abruptly ended the call. As tensions mounted, he seemed caught between protecting Meghan's voice and recognizing the harm unfolding around him. Though legally and contractually he was implicated, emotionally he appeared torn. Friends described him as lonelier than ever, caught between his longing for a simpler life and the machinery of a massive media venture. His absence at the Clarence house confrontation spoke volumes. Notified at the last minute, he declined to attend, reportedly saying, "If she did what they claim, I can't stand by her in that room." It left William and Charles to confront Meghan alone, acting on a quiet resolve passed down from a monarch who refused, even after her death, to let her family's story go to the highest bidder. He remained by himself in Montecito, reportedly powering down his phone the next morning, not out of apathy, but from an inability to face either side. When Meghan returned, he never asked for a recap. The truth hurt too much. Harry's role sits in a gray area, neither entirely culpable nor completely uninformed, torn between devotion and doubt, unsure whether his actions were saving his family or breaking it. So far, the palace has stopped short of waging open war against him. William clings to the faint hope that Harry might find his way home, both in spirit and in person. Charles is still pulled in two directions, duty on one side, paternal love on the other. Even Camilla, often cast as the antagonist, has been cautious and conciliatory when it comes to Harry. But once faith has been shattered, trust can be painfully hard to restore. Questions linger. Was Harry simply a casualty, unaware of how events unfolded? Or was he, wittingly or unwittingly, a key figure in what could be considered the monarchy's greatest betrayal? Perhaps the answer lies in what he didn't say, in what he silently allowed to be said on his behalf. In a family where silence used to be an emblem of resilience, Harry's current silence resonates differently. It's a silence that reveals more than words could. Outside Clarence house, the atmosphere that morning was charged with expectation, still and tense, like the hush preceding a fierce downpour. Within the usually tranquil Georgian hallways, an inevitable confrontation was about to unfold. Meghan arrived in a charcoal gray coat dress, hair swept back in a low bun, her expression giving away nothing. She carried no bag, only her phone. A lone assistant trailed her but stayed behind once they reached the entrance. Escorted by an impassive usher down a side corridor with a portrait of the late Queen, Meghan knew the mood was far from friendly. She was taken into a modestly sized room, its high ceilings accentuated by drawn drapes that shut out the morning light. Two chairs were set across a narrow walnut table. King Charles, Prince William, and two senior officials already waiting. No one rose to greet her. Pausing briefly, Meghan sized up the frosty stillness, then seated herself opposite William. Their eyes locked for a split second, devoid of any past warmth. "Thank you for coming," Charles began neutrally. Meghan inclined her head, assuming they were there to discuss a mental health initiative. She spoke as if she were misunderstood yet cooperative, measured in her words. "That's not the reason you're here," William cut in, his stare fixed. An oppressive quiet followed. "We've gone through everything," Charles continued. "The footage, your contracts, the terms for production." Meghan kept her chin slightly raised, feigning composure. "All right," she replied. "You crossed the line," William said. "This wasn't just your story. It was ours, shared without our consent." "I told people what really happened," Meghan countered. "It's not betrayal to show reality." William stayed controlled. "You filmed private conversations, recorded footage in places where cameras were forbidden, and used shots you knew were off limits. You insisted on privacy, but then marketed the monarchy's intimate moments." "I had to speak my truth," Meghan said. "Control my own story. And we have a responsibility to defend the institution," Charles remarked, voice subdued. "This went beyond telling your side. You took ours and put it up for sale." Meghan leaned back, tension flashing in her clenched hands. No one was raising their voice, but there was no mistaking the accusation in the air. Calmly, William reached for a folder and slid a page across the table. A licensing agreement uncovered days prior. "It was signed before you relinquished your duties," he stated. "We're aware you plan to gather content, even during family events. You weren't just reflecting, you were collecting." Meghan didn't so much as touch the paper. "I had to be prepared. I didn't trust how the palace would react when we left." William's tone turned grim. "So you filmed us, took moments you knew weren't yours to exploit. Does that sound like how a family behaves?" His voice wavered with fatigue rather than anger. Meghan shifted her gaze to Charles. You know what I've been through? The tabloids, the headlines, the lack of support here. I was left unprotected. Charles's reply was steady. This isn't about the press anymore. It's about faith and honesty. You had access and used it against us. That's not a misunderstanding. It's a betrayal. Meghan sat forward. So what now? Are you exiling me, cutting me off? You're out, William said flatly. No involvement in official correspondence, events, or charitable efforts. The palace won't comment on your future activities, and you may no longer present yourself as a working royal in anything you produce. She froze. The word struck like a final sentence. The independence she sought was now forcibly imposed, and not on her own terms. Does Harry know this? She asked quietly. He's aware, Charles answered. He chose not to come. Her composure wavered for the first time. You're making a mistake, she warned, standing up. The public is on my side. They've seen the truth, and you're only confirming it. William also rose. The truth? The truth is that you treated this family like props, captured footage for your storyline, and now can't believe we aren't playing along. Meghan's gaze flickered toward Charles, who remained resolute, saying nothing more. The choice had been made, not in anger, but because no path forward remained. A senior aide handed Meghan a sealed envelope containing an official statement. The family's final stance, obligations, and legal boundaries regarding the use of royal content. This isn't over, she whispered, turning and exiting without a backward glance, her footsteps echoing across polished marble until the front door shut with a resounding finality. In the silence that followed, William sank slowly into his chair, tension evident in his shoulders, but relief settling across his features. Not a happy relief, but a resigned acceptance. That's that, Charles said softly. William nodded, gazed distant. Let's hope it stays final. And so life at Clarence House continued, with staff and advisors carrying on their daily tasks. Yet something fundamental had shifted beneath the regal veneer. The monarchy, through its timeless lessons of survival, had drawn an unassailable boundary, one Meghan had never believed they'd have the nerve to impose.